Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us today. I am Tony Flock with Creative Leadership Solutions, and I am pleased to be your moderator today for the webinar with Dr. Douglas Reeves as we consider what teachers and school administrators can learn from the COVID-19 shutdown. Just a few notes as we begin. All participants are muted due to the audience size. Please interact with us using the question and chat feature as we welcome your comments, questions, and insights throughout the webinar. We have also included several interactive activities in today's webinar, so please have your cell phone handy to text responses to our questions. If you are joining us from outside of the United States and that text would cost you money, please just use the comment or chat features to send your response, and I will share those with Dr. Reeves. The slides from today's presentation have been posted in the handout section and are available for download. There are both black and white and color versions there. And finally, today's webinar is being recorded and will be posted to our website shortly. Please feel free to download that recording to share with any colleagues who are unable to attend today. So with those thoughts in mind, I would like to introduce Dr. Douglas Reeves, founder of Creative Leadership Solutions. He is the author of more than 40 books and 100 articles on education, leadership, and student achievement. Doug and the Creative Leadership team are providing free webinars for teachers, leaders, parents, and students around the world. Doug.
Well, thank you very much, and hello, everybody. Really appreciate you joining us. We've got a very large crowd, but I want to make sure that you get the personal support that you need. So not only will we be soliciting your feedback throughout the afternoon, but also I want to make sure that you can use our contact information to get a hold of me directly. Sometimes people want a personalized return, so you can tweet at Douglas Reeves, and you'll also see in the handouts my email as well, and I'm always happy to give you a personal response to those questions. You heard, as Tony said, that we're providing free professional development in this crisis time. Typically, these webinars are about 45 minutes each. A very popular topic has been on feedback and grading, as you can imagine, but we're also providing support on special education, equity, and a new one on fearless leadership. Please let us know what your needs are, and we're making sure to reach out to audiences around the world. You can stop anytime with questions and challenges. You can use the question function on the internet board. In fact, let's just do a quick check to make sure that the question function is working and that our audio and video is working. So I'm going to give you about 30 seconds. Use the question function to let me know if you have good audio and video.
And the responses are pouring in, Doug. And looks like our group are hearing you and seeing you just fine.
Okay, excellent. Then let's get to work. One other question that I want to ask you as a favor, and that is to represent the people who are not here. Think about your students, think about parents, think about colleagues who may not have been able to join us. It's okay to represent them as well, and also to say that this is a safe and appropriate place for challenges. Look, I know that grading and feedback are pretty emotional topics sometimes, and I want you to know that this is a safe place to disagree. And if we learn from those disagreements, I know that I always learn from divergent thinking. Hope you will too. So regard this as a safe space for disagreement. Okay, next slide. A couple of offers that we want to make to you. My colleague, Dr. David Gleason, internationally known adolescent psychologist, is offering free grief support groups. I hope that that has not affected you, but I can tell you earlier today, I was with a group that had lost 7 staff members to COVID-19 who have passed away. If you've got adolescents who are in need of grief support groups, you can go to service@creativeleadership.net. We'll arrange that. Other people are simply needing a way to process what they're going through. We're offering writing reflection support at marshwriters.org. If you go to marshwriters.org, you'll find free support of writers, encouraging writers. We meet both live and through virtual means the first Saturday of every month. And of course, if you need leadership support, that's my personal email address. It doesn't go to anybody else, it goes straight to me, douglas.reeves@creativeleadership.net. That's douglas.reeves, R-E-E-V-E-S, @creativeleadership.net. Okay, let's get underway. One of the things that I want to ask you to do is to let me know what's top of mind for you. So my colleague, Tony Flock, is going to give you directions on how to respond in a single word of what's most important for you. Please have your text, either cell phone or computer text facilities ready. Tony?
All right, ladies and gentlemen, so we are going to take a moment to do a couple interactive activities. And so using Poll Everywhere, we're going to ask that you take out your cell phone and please send a text to recipient 22333. Address your text to 22333. Send the message Creative Lead 764. The message is Creative Lead 764. Once you have joined that, you should receive a reply back from Poll Everywhere saying that you have joined Creative Leadership's poll. And we'll give you just a moment to do that before introducing the question. All right, again, please send a text to recipient 22333. Type the message Creative Lead 764, hit send. And then in that same conversation, please respond using one word to the question, what are your greatest concerns about teaching and learning in a virtual environment? We'll give you about a minute to do that. And responses are pouring in. Doug. And a couple of responses on the question feature echoing what we're seeing. Engagement is definitely popping up. Feedback.
And it looks like equity is number one. So I'll make sure that we address these today.
And definitely consistent with our recent sessions. And one of our participants is, oh man, only one word. Kevin, please feel free to send in more than one at a time.
Okay, about 10 more seconds, please.
And we have a response, learning.
Well, thanks, friends. This is really illuminating, and we'll make sure that we save this word cloud and make that part of what we share with all of you. Clearly, equity and engagement are at the top of the list. So let's make sure that we address those and the other concerns that you've raised throughout our discussion this afternoon. Next slide, please. So if there's one big lesson I want us to take away, it's that we don't leave this crisis in the fall, in the winter, whenever we do leave it in 2021, saying, well, thank God that's over. Now we can go back to what we were doing before. Because the message I'm here to convey is it's not just COVID-19 teaching, it's good teaching. And there are a lot of things that people are learning in the course of this crisis that I think are going to have long-term applicability way after this crisis has passed, and that we'll be able to apply to our benefit and to the benefit of our students. Next slide. So let's think about effective teaching in all environments, and that's relationships and feedback. For example, we know that trusting and emotionally solid relationships between students and teachers were true as vital parts of education in 2019 before the crisis. It's been true now during the crisis, and it's going to be true 5 and 10 years from now. So everything that we do has to be based on emotionally solid relationships between teacher and student. Effective feedback, and we're going to elaborate on what that means. I use the acronym FAIR for FAST, for fair, accurate, specific, and timely. You know, feedback, John Hattie's research suggests, is one of the most important tools in the teacher's toolbox. And yet an astonishing amount of the feedback that we provide is inconsistent, differs from one class to another. It's inaccurate, grading things that we think we're grading, but in fact, the student hears something else. It's not specific, that is, the student doesn't know how to get better, and it's certainly not timely. They receive feedback long after it's too late to do anything about it. So we're going to talk about fast feedback, fair, accurate, specific, and timely, and meaningful checks for understanding. That means not just asking if people have questions, but digging deeper to find if students really have done the work in the first place, and if so, do they understand what they did? Next slide, please. One of the things that you saw in the word cloud a few moments ago was concern about engagement. And around the world, I'm hearing concerns about disengaged and absent students. So let me ask you this. What do we do about disengagement and absenteeism before the COVID crisis? I'll tell you what I've seen around the world in more than 40 countries. Deep inquiry. We just didn't assume that if they didn't show up, they just don't care. We wanted to know what's going on at home. For example, sometimes you're right, they're lazy, they're teenagers. There's a clinical diagnosis for teenagers who are lazy. We call it normal. But also what I found is just this week, a young woman who took over her mom's shift in a laundry because they needed to put money on the table. So was working 8 hours a day in a laundromat to help take care of the family. That's not laziness, friends. We found other kids who were responsible for sibling care, have found other kids who were disengaged, not because they wanted to be, but because they didn't have computer access. In other words, deep inquiry to find out why they're absent, why they're disengaged. In 2019, we engaged in problem solving. Hey, young man, why are you not making it to school? Is it a transportation problem? You having trouble waking up? Let's see what we can do. And everything from providing alternatives to traditional transportation to wake-up calls to robocalls, not after they're absent, but before the absence starts. That's the kind of problem solving that we engaged in before, and we can do so now. And most importantly, students need a sense of purpose and meaning. You know that when school was in regular session, our clubs and extracurricular activities did that. They didn't need a lecture from me about showing up. They had a classmate who said, hey, you missed practice yesterday. We needed you. That sense of purpose and meaning is equally vital now. Next slide. So what do we do with insufficient information, particularly when we have it on grading? A lot of you have been concerned that if a kid has been disengaged since February, how in the world do we fill in the gaps? Well, I'll tell you what we don't do. We don't fill in the gaps with our worst assumptions. Think about this. Before COVID-19, what did we do with a student who was coming to us without a transcript? What did we do with new arrivals to the country? Did we just give them a bunch of F's and zeros? I don't think so. I think what you did was you used the latest and best evidence that you had. And what did you do when students were out due to illness? You didn't just give them a bunch of zeros. We used the latest and best evidence that we had. In other words, what we have done in the past is a guideline to what we do right now when we don't have full evidence on student achievement. You use the evidence you've got. And if the latest and best evidence was February, that's what you use. But also, let's be candid. We have students who are thriving in this electronic environment. In fact, they're doing better now in an electronic environment than they were in a bricks and mortar environment. So let us then also use the latest and best evidence and not average in the mistakes of January and February. The best practice in providing accurate feedback to students, grades and other sort of feedback, is latest and best evidence. Next slide. So when there's limited information, what do we do? As I said, we use the latest and best evidence. You never use the average. If I could ask you for just one reform in grading and feedback, it's to get rid of the average and get rid of this weird punishment for missing assessments. I see it every single year, particularly in the spring, of a student who is finishing like gangbusters in advanced placement classes, earning 4s and 5s and getting a D because of missing assignments in January. Friends, whatever they were missing is pretty obviously irrelevant if they're getting 4s and 5s on their advanced placement exams. Let's use the latest and best evidence. Stop the average. We tell our students at 5th grade to learn about mean, median, and mode, because the mean, the average, is not always the best measurement of a data set. Let's learn that same 5th grade lesson ourselves and stop using the average. Let's assess power standards. You don't need to assess every single standard. Teachers are driving themselves crazy with these lengthy and detailed report cards on every single, sweetheart, Mary, I'm on the line. Mary, I'm on the line, sorry. Sorry, my daughter was practicing the piano, which normally is lovely, but not now. They use power standards. They don't assess every standard. That power standard is that brief subset of standards, only a half a dozen or so, that are most important to advance to the next level of learning. And we got to be honest about insufficient evidence. This is a real financial issue as well as an academic issue. If financially a student, the district can't afford to have somebody repeat a class, don't make them repeat the entire class because they're missing 3 standards. Just identify insufficient evidence or incomplete work, fill in those 3 things that are missing, and don't have them repeat the same class. Next slide, please. So now is the time for essential grading reforms. As I said, get rid of the average. It's mathematically inaccurate, and it does not accurately describe student performance. And let me just address this from a teacher's point of view. Look, my best days as a teacher were with that student who struggled, and then had a breakthrough. If I want to honor the breakthrough, if I want to honor the emotional and psychological perseverance and resilience that they demonstrated, I don't punish them for the struggle. In fact, I reward the breakthrough and don't hold that struggle against them. Get rid of the 100-point scale. It's an historical anachronism starting in the early 20th centuries when we thought in the dawn of the computing age that we could tell the difference on a 100-point scale. But you know, we can't. Everybody on this webinar can tell me the difference between an A and a B and a C and a D, but you flat cannot tell me the difference between an 82 and an 83. It's a distinction without a difference. And the same is true when you get down to decimal points of the 98.2 versus the 98.3. It's silly. Get rid of the 100-point scale. Go back to the old-fashioned A, B, C, D, F grading. It's what we've had for most of the 100 years of public education. The idea that we've always done the 100-point scale simply is not true. Do not unnecessarily have battles about standards-based grading in obscure terminology. I know some of you with good intent have adopted standards-based grading, but really, you don't need to do that. You can have A, B, C, D, F grading and also have a standards-based approach to grading, but you don't need to use words like exceed standards, which is obscure, ambiguous, and just starts fights with parents. So if your culture is A, B, C, D, F grading, you can keep that and still grade students on achievement against a standard. Let's not fight the wrong battles. And let's avoid words like exceed standards because it implies a quantitative difference. If meeting a standard is 3 pages, exceeding it is 5 standards, it's 5 pages, I don't think that's what you mean. If meeting standards is 8 problems, is exceeding standards 10 problems? No, what we want is not exceeds, but exemplary, work that is different in complexity and rigor. Next slide, please.
Doug, as we get ready to transition to our next poll, a couple of questions have come in. Would this be a good time to share those with you?
Yes, please.
All right, so one question here from Michelle. Considering the education in-person environment post-COVID-19, with schools having a fixed amount of space, what do you think about school schedules going forward? Should there be some sort of hybrid online and in-classroom learning in order to reduce total number of students and meet social distancing protocols?
I think the hybrid learning and the online learning is only a matter of last resort. If you have to have it, fine. And I also know schools that are building in some times just to practice, just to stay in practice. So if you want to do that like once a month, or if you want to do that in place of a snow day, or you want to program those in, fine. But the idea that online learning is a substitute for face-to-face relationships is an illusion. It's just not true. So as a last resort, as practice, fine, but not as something that we do all the time. Ask the parents who are paying $50,000 tuition payments for kids who are not even seeing a professor. They're not too wild about substituting electronic performance for personal relationships either. I think the same is true for students. And by the way, it's not just the relationship with us as teachers, it's a relationship with each other that they oftentimes miss out on as well.
All right, and a couple other, actually several comments coming in to the effect that Mary plays very nicely and that they appreciate that you are human as is everyone else. And one in particular from a former music teacher saying that that he appreciated hearing her play. So two other questions here. I think comment from Ken, I think we need to eliminate the word work from the vocabulary of education. What do you think about that?
What a thoughtful point of view. If we replace work with learning, I'd so much appreciate it, or replace it with practice. And just to take you really seriously on this, let's stop calling it homework. Homework is an illusion. A, because as my wise principal told me, it may not have anything to do with the word home. And B, it sounds like drudgery. If when you ask most teachers, why do we assign homework? They don't say anything about work. They say students need practice. And they're right. They do need practice. So the question is, what are the hallmarks of practice? Coaching, feedback, immediate opportunity to get better, like a good music practice, like a good athletic practice. It doesn't happen in isolation at home.
All right. You've written about the impact of the zero. Do you think zero should be disallowed?
I do on the 100-point scale. It's not just the zero in isolation. If I had to write that article over again, I would have said the case against the mathematically inaccurate zero. And the zero is mathematically inaccurate. In fact, it is the academic death penalty when it happens on a 100-point scale. You get a couple of zeros on that 100-point scale, I don't care how many A's you make, you're dead. There's no recovery from that. And that is why, friends, your worst discipline problems, your worst disengagement problems happen every April and May for kids who say, my goose is cooked, nothing I can do. I can get A's for every day for the rest of the semester, and I'm going to fail because of all those zeros in January. So here, just tie this in a bow. If you had a 4-point scale, A is a 4, B is a 3, C is a 2, D is a 1, F is a 0. I'm okay with a 0 with a genuine F on the 4-point scale because it's not the death penalty and I can recover from it. If you get rid of the average, use the latest and best evidence, get rid of the 100-point scale, then you can still have a 0 for work that is simply not done. The 0 that I object to is the 0 on the 100-point scale combined with the average.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Please keep questions coming in. We will pause again to address more as they arrive. Transitioning into our second polling activity for you here. Again, if you have not joined the poll and are able to send a text, please text recipient 22333 with the message Creative Lead 764. Once you've joined, you should, or if you already have joined, you should just be able to send your response to the following questions. So, what are 2 ways to improve feedback and grading right now? So I know we are asking you for 2 responses. Please send 1 word per message. We'll give you about a minute to do that. And starting to roll in there, Doug.
We'll take about 60 seconds. And about 10 more seconds, please. And back to large group. I really want to say thank you to all the people who wrote rubrics. I was just thinking about my friend, the late Grant Wiggins, who really helped to launch the enthusiasm for rubrics in the United States and around the world. And he reminded us that Rubrics started from the Latin term rules for how to do the liturgy just right. And it was the precision of rubrics that not only helped the learning process, but also helped us understand how to proceed from one step to the next. The best rubrics today are not those written by one PhD to impress another PhD. The best rubrics are the ones that students understand. In fact, what you've reminded me of, and a tool that I'm happy to share with you that I've used, is called the 3-column rubric. And in the left-hand column, it's my expectations in student language, not in the fancy language that you see a lot of rubrics today, but in student language. The middle column is student self-assessment. The right-hand column is only where I disagree with the student. Friends, if you'll consider doing rubrics that way, it'll make students engage in metacognition, it'll save you time, and it will really place some of the cognitive load where it demands, which is on our students. Thanks for these really thoughtful responses. Next slide, please. So there's several big ideas that I want to try to convey as we reflect upon the lessons learned. And one of the things we've learned from the COVID-19 kind of quarantine is multiple methods of communication. And if I had one big idea I want you to take away from this, it is please do not let the ideal be the enemy of progress. The ideal may be very sophisticated synchronous lessons, but I've been talking to people today who serve deeply rural areas who have zero connectivity, or they delivered thousands of Chromebooks that kids don't know how to use, or they had Chromebooks and connectivity, but the same bandwidth was being shared by 3 siblings and 2 parents. So good luck with trying to have interactive lessons with that. So synchronous lessons are great, but please don't rely on that alone. I've seen really good work with asynchronous lessons, where teachers are creating short little videos, 3-4 minutes, to convey a single concept. What about plain old-fashioned telephones? Friends, we are underusing this. Even students who have difficulty with connectivity, they still have a telephone. Even in rural areas, they may not have cell phone service, they've still got a telephone. Let's make sure that we use the power of the relationship of a voice-to-voice communication using plain old telephone service. It's one of the best things we can do. And friends, please don't put this on the back of teachers alone. Everybody who's cashing a paycheck, every admin, every counselor, every paraprofessional, everybody in the school ought to be sharing the burden of picking up the telephone, talking one-to-one with students and families. Let's use the sidewalk. You can have social and emotional check-ins and also have appropriate wellness checks. You can have the gloves on, the masks on, but there is no substitute for that face-to-face through masks connection with our children. Get out in the sidewalk and do it. Libraries, community libraries and our school libraries coming together in remarkable ways to put together sanitized books. Those books aren't doing anybody any good sitting on shelves. Clean them up, sanitize them, put them in book bags along with supplies, and let's have organized story hours. Mail delivery. I know in some of the more remote areas, that's all we've got, but be sure you have postage paid returned envelopes. And tech buddies, where people are struggling with technology. Our students need to feel a sense of meaning and purpose. So for those who have mastered the technology, hook them up with a tech buddy, maybe somebody in their grade, maybe somebody younger, who they can help to make this worthwhile. Next slide. A student leadership. I think we make a grave mistake in the last few months when we make students feel like helpless victims. One of the best things that we can do socially and emotionally, and a key to their psychological health, is to let them know that they are people of agency. They're people who have lives of purpose and meaning. They're not helpless victims. They can do, for example, poetry slams. They can do musical groups. They can do art displays. They can do story time in multiple languages, sometimes for just 20 minutes with primary students. They can check on elders. There's all manner of things that our students can do to feel that they're leading lives of service. And let's not leave the arts behind in this time of COVID-19. Next slide. Homework menus. Teachers are really angry and frustrated that they're assigning homework and they're simply not getting done. So I've got an idea. Let's stop assigning homework, at least in the old-fashioned way of do the odd-numbered problems 1 through 20. Because the best practice, as we said earlier, is practice with the coach. That means don't do the math problems alone. do the math problems right now while I'm watching, and I can randomly call on people and see what you got. That way I know it wasn't copied, I knew there was no cheating, and I know that students can explain their work right then in front of me. But what I can do, because I know many of you and your parents demand homework, is to provide a homework menu. Things like helping with a meal that involves doubling or having a recipe. Things like conducting interviews of parents and elders to create a family history. Things like creating a neighborhood newspaper. Things like reading aloud to either over the phone or to younger siblings. You could probably create 20 more things that are a menu that engage the power of choice. But when it comes time to doing what we call practice, remember, practice needs a coach. Practice needs feedback. And that's the classroom teacher observing the practice and providing immediate feedback. Next slide. On-call academic content. You know, this is one of the best things that I'm seeing. I know that when we do synchronous communication, sometimes what I'm hearing is the teacher doing a 30-minute lesson without taking a breath. That was no good in a brick and mortar school, and it's no good now. That's what makes students disengage and check out. What we can do is provide 3 to 5 minute short presentations. You can do them asynchronously so students can look at them at their leisure, and then they come to class in the synchronous environment and devote that to asking questions so that I understand what those 3 to 5 minutes were all about. Way better than a 30-minute lecture. Next slide. Meaningful checks for understanding. A lot of you are concerned about copying work, and this is the key. When you hear somebody say, everybody with me, or are there any questions? Hey, that's novice stuff. Everybody on this call, you're way beyond novices or you wouldn't be here. So you don't say, everybody with me, or any questions. You have a genuinely detailed check for understanding. And I want to illustrate exactly what I mean, because I've heard from all over the world teachers who are really frustrated saying, I'm staying up till 11 o'clock at night to grade papers that I don't even know if the kids were doing. Here's a better way. Next slide. Say something like, next slide. Gee, Jerome, I really appreciate that you cited those 2 sources in your essay. And by the way, don't think this is just high school stuff. I've seen 3rd graders citing sources in essays, and I really, really appreciate that. However, Jerome, please explain why you chose those sources. Tell me about a couple of sources that you considered, but you didn't decide to cite because you thought what you chose was more credible. Let me tell you what, if Jerome copied that paper from the internet or from a sibling, he's not going to be able to answer that question. This is a meaningful check for understanding and gets to something really appropriate. Here's another one. Christina, man, you nailed that geometric proof, and I really appreciate that. But Christina, I don't understand how you got from steps 2 to step 3. Please explain that. If Christina copied that geometric proof, she's not going to be able to explain that step 2 to step 3. Now, I know you can't do this with every student, but I'll tell you what you can do. Take a page from our kindergarten colleagues and use equity sticks. You know, what our kindergarten colleagues do is that they have every student's name on a stick and they pull them out of the box at random so that everybody has a chance to be called on. Our seniors in high school ought to be doing this. Nobody gets to sit in the back row and check out, relying upon the spring butts in the front row to always answer the question. Everybody has an equal probability of being called on. And when you use equity sticks and you have these meaningful checks for understanding, you can't do it for everybody, but everybody knows they have an equal probability of being called on. That is the best way to have 100% engagement in your classroom. Next slide. Wellness checks. You know, again, we can learn so much from our primary school colleagues. Watch them do their circles in the morning. Their circles in the morning give everybody a sense of identity. Hey, my name's Maggie, my name's Shimon. They know exactly who's there, and they'll ask them a question of the day to learn about them. It only takes 5 or 10 minutes, and it starts the day with a consciousness that is socially relevant, recognizing the worth of every individual. Why do we stop doing that in adolescence? You know, you don't necessarily have to sit in the carpet, though it's not a bad idea. Sit down, recognize each other, say their name. If you'll invest 5 or 10 minutes in that wellness check and circle right up front, I don't care if it's a junior AP European history class, it'll make the rest of the class go better. And you can do this in a virtual environment before. Adolescents, above all, complain that nobody knows me. I've been here for 3 months and nobody knows my name. If you'll invest this time as our primary colleagues do, they'll know that you know and that their colleagues know their name. And I want to also respectfully request for those of you invested in PLCs, and I hope everybody is in professional learning communities, you know the 4 questions. 1, what do we want students to learn? 2, how do we know if they've learned it? 3, what do they do if they don't? What do we do, number 4, if they already have? Please ask question 0. Question 0 is, what supports do our students need? Emotional supports, medical supports, physical supports, so that they can learn better this week. Next slide. Very short assessments. Teachers, you're working too hard, and I grieve for teachers. I can see the timestamps on your email. You're up at 11 o'clock at night. You're losing your weekends. You're not talking to your families, even though you're 3 feet away from them. Stop the long assessments and use really short ones. So short, you can literally grade it in class or at the very least the very same day. 2 or 3 items. Don't, in other words, do a giant math unit assessment. If what I want to know is, hey, can my 7th grader plot a point on a coordinate grid? Do that right now while I watch. If I want to watch, if a 3rd grader can have a topic sentence followed by supporting sentences, do that right now. If a 9th grader can do the quadratic equation, do that right now. Not 20 items, not 30 minutes, something that I can do immediately and get immediate feedback on. Next slide. Time and project management. If there's any silver lining to COVID-19 and the virtual environment, it is this. You and I both know that a lot of students have the illusion of time and project management because they have a parent who is using Microsoft Project Manager that could be used to build an F-35 jet aircraft for their kids' homework and projects. But what they really need is the skill of taking a project and breaking it down into component parts. So here is my counsel. I defer to you to say what the appropriate interval is. Maybe for primary kids, it's 5 minutes. Maybe for intermediate, 10 minutes. For middle school, 15. For high school, 30. You decide. But when you're assigning a project, and this is the time of year when that happens all the time, the end of your poster, the end of your demonstration, the end of your research paper, break it down into these intervals. There might be 15 or 20 of these intervals. And we expect students to do that, but they didn't learn it full grown from the head of Zeus. They learn it because somebody like us taught that to them. Break the project down. Some kids, you're used to being able to say, here's a project due 3 weeks from now, and you grade it. Other kids need piece by piece the project assessed every single day. That's the way that they learn time management and project management, and help them put that jigsaw puzzle together. It's one of the best skills middle school students can learn to get more successful in high school. It's one of the best skills high school students can learn as they go forth to college. Next slide, please. Public speaking. Hey, it's not just kids who fear it. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands in this virtual environment, but you and I both know that there's a lot of adults who fear public speaking as well. What a great opportunity we have right now to help our children cross the chasm between being silent and making a public speech. They think they're crossing the Grand Canyon. Here's the intermediate step. If you're not comfortable reciting in class tomorrow, students, here's an option that I'm going to give you. You can, on your own, create a 1 or 2 minute response to the question. And I'm going to tell you what the questions are up front. So there's no secrecy about this, no gotchas. And if I'm going to ask you to explain to me in your words what the preamble to the Constitution means, or I'm going to ask you to explain to me why is the Pythagorean theorem true, or explain to me what are the components of a good hypothesis. I'm going to tell you the questions up front. And if you're not comfortable yet telling me that out loud in class tomorrow, make a 1 or 2 minute video, and you can use that. And that's the intermediate point between silence and recitation in class. I know that that's not going to be a permanent substitute, but I worry deeply that too many students choose silence. They always use phone a friend. They always say, I'm not ready and I'm not prepared. And then we, not wanting to harm them emotionally, say, that's okay, I'll come back to you later on. I think a better step is to have them recite, but let them do so in a way that is confident and comfortable. And this intermediate step will ultimately get them to the point where, rather than just doing the video, they have a high enough level of confidence to recite. Let's build in intermediate steps. By the way, you know, this is what special education brilliantly does all the time. They take what you and I might think is one task, break it down into 2 or 3 tasks. We can emulate those brilliant special education teachers in every single facet of our teaching. Next slide, please. The egg timer. This is a great strategy, and I've seen this used by everybody from 1st and 2nd grade teachers to Harvard professors. Here's how it works. Old-fashioned 3-minute egg timer. 3 minutes, no more, to present the concept. I know you could lecture on for 30 minutes because you're an expert. We knew that. Boil it down to 3 minutes for one concept. Then ding, 3 minutes for small groups. Use the technology you've got to break people into small groups, just as you would in the class without technology. Immediately break into small groups. Wise teachers have worked out those protocols in the first couple of weeks of class so that students know immediately who they're going to turn to. Maybe it's an elbow partner, maybe it's 4 people sitting around them. Immediately get into small groups. Ding, 3 minutes to whole class review. That's it, 9 minutes for a single concept. Presentation, small group, whole class. Think about that. In a 45-minute class period, I can get 9 concepts in very short 9-minute bursts, broken into 3-minute bursts. That class time will whiz by. And I promise you, friends, it doesn't whiz by when there's a 30-minute presentation of the concept. Now, it's hard. It's hard to take things and break them down into their 3-minute component parts. But if we're really interested in learning, not just in presentations, this is what's important. Administrators, this means that when you're observing a concept, please don't get buffaloed by the brilliant presentation. There are award-winning lecturers that win those awards without one lick of learning happening. Real learning, which is what I want our administrators to observe, doesn't happen when the teacher's talking. The real learning happens in those small groups and in the processing of the whole class. Next slide.
And Doug, before we transition to looking ahead, a couple of questions have come in and some comments. Reminder based on some earlier comments from the audience from our friend Art, who suggested that participants may want to look at Hattie's meta-analysis of student-teacher relationships for the impact that those have. Your conversations earlier there, and several questions related to this issue of how would you recommend moving forward, given that many states have recommended that grades either freeze or can get no worse as of the date of the shutdown? What do you think is equitable there?
Let me address the first one first. John Hattie is a good friend of mine. I just heard from him, in fact, last week by email, and nominating him for an award, which he richly deserves. And he's a prolific author, so it's hard to say when you look at the Hattie oeuvre, what do you choose? My recommendation is Visible Learning for Teachers, because it's very accessible, frankly, much more accessible than some of the more complex statistical work. And in the appendix, he has very specific guides for teachers on how to translate quick observations of student work into observations about impact. So he's written easily 30 or 40 books. Take a look at Visible Learning for Teachers. Secondly, with respect to the decisions made around the country, you know, you ask a straight question or you deserve a straight answer. The worst practice out there are school boards who are saying, well, we don't know, everybody gets an A, or heck, we don't know, everybody gets a pass. I can't dissent strongly enough from that point of view, particularly for secondary students. Imagine that you're the parent of a high school junior, a high school senior, and imagine moreover that you're the parent of an economically disadvantaged kid whose only route to post-secondary education is a scholarship. And now imagine that that kid has for 17 years distinguished himself or herself by doing great work. And now you're told, right as you apply for a scholarship, forget about it, kid. There's no difference between an A and a D minus. You've just cut the legs out from under that student who might have had a scholarship and now finds there's no difference between the A and the D minus. So I strongly disagree with the everybody gets the same grade. Now, let me answer more precisely. What about latest and best evidence? That I am consistent on. If a student has had zero access to technology and the latest and best evidence is February, then by all means use February. If by contrast, the student has had access and has turned in great work in April and May, use that. But I can tell you from the testimony of teachers who have talked to me, when school districts go to pass-fail, attendance drops by 50%. What the heck? Why bother showing up? And that's not only bad for students, friends, it's bad for us. It cuts the legs out from under the motivation of teachers as well. So we can still have appropriate grades, but remember, it's not a one-size-fits-all. It's latest and best evidence. It's not everybody doing the same assignments. It's latest and best evidence, proficiency in those power standards that really matters.
Lots of positive comments, Doug, about the idea of checking for understanding as a means of also monitoring cheating, but a specific question related to virtual summative assessments, and any thoughts about how we might ensure that the final task is actually what the kids have done?
Yeah, that's a reasonable point. And of course, as you probably read in the news, a lot of anxiety about the ACTs. I think the ACT approach was to make the exams shorter so that there's less time to cheat. But I think, frankly, they're engaging in some illusions about that. Here is honestly what I would rather suggest to you is make the, if you do a summative assessment, incorporate into those at least a telephone call that has a random check for understanding. Don't just look at the papers alone. I think that's respectful of the teacher who is investing so much time in both creating and evaluating those assessments, investing an additional 5 or 10 minutes for some random checks for understanding. And then if you find out that they can't explain something, that leads to further inquiry. I'm not assuming that a student is guilty. I'm saying that suggests to me that if they can't explain how they got an answer, then you may want to reconsider whether or not that test is valid. It is also respectful of students who really have worked so hard to meet your expectations, and they deserve the opportunity to shine. And they can't shine when the interactions between students and teachers are anonymous. Now, how in the heck do you find time to do this when you've got 180 students? The only way you do that is with shorter assessments. Forget everything that college assessment professor who looked like me told you, that you got to sample every content domain and you wind up with 50 and 60 item assessments. Choose 15 or 20 items wisely and then do random checks for understanding. I think that's the way to do it. That's respectful of you and respectful of your students who are working really hard.
All right, so 3 questions I think are all shades of the same thing, Doug, so try to do my best to synopsize these. Suggestions on assessment for project-based classes such as art, family, consumer education, etc. Another question that said, how do we give students a sense of purpose and meaning during remote learning? And I kind of see those two as connected. And then any differences in all of this for primary and intermediate grades?
Sure. So the first one with respect to summative assessments for art, that is the most beautiful example. I use this all the time. Go to an art museum near you and ask, is anybody's first draft hanging on the museum wall? What you see on the museum wall was the product after a lot of torn canvases, a lot of smashed bronzes and ceramics. In other words, the museum wall is the ideal illustration of why the average never works. It's the final product that demonstrates proficiency, not the average of all that came before it. Same with family and consumer sciences. I don't know about you, but there's a fair number of fallen souffles and cakes that didn't turn out quite so well before the beautiful finished product. Grade the finished product after lots of trial and error, and praise the learning that happened from that trial and error. And finally, with regard to our CTE friends, the best example are our computer programmers and our robotics programs. There's a ton of mistakes happens. Watch the robots run into walls. Ton of mistakes in robotics programs and computer programs. What we value is debugging, not the absence of bugs, but debugging, making mistakes, finding mistakes, fixing mistakes. That's how you get to go Google, not by avoiding mistakes or pretending that there weren't any mistakes. So all of those areas are brilliant examples of avoiding the average, and we have a lot to learn from our FACS, from our art teachers, and from our robotics and computer teachers. Now, with respect to the difference between elementary and secondary, I do understand that sometimes at the elementary grades, we use words like meet standards and so on. At the elementary grades, we sometimes, at the secondary grades rather, we use A, B, C, D, F. I'm still down with that. I think people who say get rid of letter grades are fighting the wrong battle. You can still have letter grades as long as you make them accurate, as long as you make them honest. And that means getting rid of the average, and that means grading really for proficiency, not based on compliance.
All right, next slide is up.
So let's think about what we can do right now. And I'm mindful of our time. I've only got a few minutes left. So what do we do right now for this coming summer? I want to recommend that you really think about power standards. We've lost 3 months of learning. You cannot expect teachers in the 2021 school year to cover every jot and tittle of every single standard. It's just not possible. And speaking real rapidly is not the answer. Moreover, my friends, the standards themselves, even if we didn't have this crisis, were designed for 1 year of learning. And I'm willing to bet some of you have got students who needed more than 1 year of learning, even without this crisis. So power standards mean you boil it down to standards that meet 3 criteria. What has leverage? For example, leverage means that if I push on this lever, I'm addressing many other standards. For example, pushing the lever of nonfiction writing not only helps writing, reading comprehension, but also mathematics, science, social studies. Pushing the lever of tables, charts, and graphs not only helps my math standards, helps science, social studies. What has leverage? Number 2, what has endurance? When you look at standards, don't just look at your own grade level. Argumentative writing starts in most states in 4th grade, and 6th and 8th and 10th. Look at the whole spectrum. Ask what has endurance. And finally, here's the best investment you can make. Buy some virtual pizza for the teacher in the next level of learning. This is particularly true for my 5th grade colleagues who are sending kids to 6th grade. Buy that virtual pizza and say, what do I need to do to send kids to you next year with confidence and success? That 6th grade teacher never says you better cover every single standard. 8th grade teachers, buy some virtual pizza for your 9th grade colleagues. Ask them, what do I need to do to send students to you with confidence and success? They never say cover every single 8th grade standard. They say, give me a list that is brief and focused. And it includes not only academic standards, but organizational and behavioral standards as well. And of course, most importantly, my friends, think about those new teachers joining our profession who thought that they were going to get a field experience in the spring of 2020 and got nothing. They need your help. They need your mentorship. And I know many of you provide that now, but if you've got a new teacher coming on who was denied a meaningful clinical experience, for goodness sake, give them the on-site, in-class, every day direct support that they need, and make sure that there's absolutely no humiliation in asking about the nuts and bolts of classroom management, of parent communication, of curriculum development. We all can remember what it's like to be a 1st grade teacher, but none of us, I hope, were 1st grade teachers with 0 clinical experience, and that's what some of our colleagues are facing. Give them the love and support and encouragement that they need. Same is true for a lot of teachers who are starting to loop, but they've never taught in that new grade. If you've got colleagues teaching in a new grade or in a new subject, treat them as you would with a love and tender loving care and gentleness and support that you would a 1st-year teacher. They need your help. And finally, for the 1st week of school, let's think now. Remember what I said about question 0? Don't start that PLC meeting without question 0. What are the physical and emotional supports that our students need to be successful? Let's right now identify who is chronically absent, who is chronically disengaged, not just during COVID-19, but throughout the 1920 school year, who was suspended. Don't wait for another year of chronic absenteeism, for another year of behavioral problems. Let's have face-to-face meetings with families, with students, with parents to address those issues 1st week of school. Next slide. For this year, we want to make sure that we have intensive in-class support observation. And let's, friends, separate observation from evaluation. All of us need observation and support. Totally make that different from evaluations, which wind up being adversarial and oftentimes vague. Observations can give me specific feedback and support that I need. get intensive PLC support. People like Tony Flock, who's on this call, and other colleagues are really helping to supercharge your PLC collaborative team meetings by providing direct support for them. A lot of time and money is spent on PLCs, and without intensive coaching, that time and money is not always well spent. And let's implement improved grading systems right now, based on latest and best evidence, not the average. Next slide.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, a final response. We'd like to hear from you. Again, text 22333, send the message creative lead 764. And our closing poll question for you today is, what can you start doing now to plan for recovery? And Doug, as they're responding to that question, we've gotten a couple of requests for Mary to come in and close out with a song. Specifically Sweet Caroline.
Exactly. I'll ask her if she's willing to. Hey, Mary, are you in there? No, I think she's receded. She's gone back to the teen cave. But I'll have her bake you cookies next time and play Sweet Caroline.
All right. So scrolling across the screen, we see gaps, organized, power standards. Power standards showing up several times. Reflection, planning, identifying power standards, collaboration. So ladies and gentlemen, we will let that run, and a couple of comments coming in, rethinking assessment.
Well, in closing, let me just make a couple of comments. How much I appreciate your interactivity today. I think that makes for a much more lively and engaging discussion, and I really appreciate your thoughtful engagement throughout the afternoon. Moreover, I want to make clear that this is not the end of our discussion, but the beginning. I am deeply committed to schools around the world and supporting them, not only with free professional development like this, but also one-to-one questions. I get them all the time, and I personally answer every single one. Doesn't mean that I've got all the answers, but I do want to make sure that you get at least a thoughtful and respectful reply. I should also tell you that my volunteer group called finishthedissertation.org has been blazing the last few weeks as people who are shut in are, for reasons I'm not sure I understand, either starting or restarting work on their dissertations. So if you're one of those ABD people who's been stuck, use this as an opportunity to get unstuck and go to finishthedissertation.org. You get free one-to-one support so you can cross the finish line. So we're here to help. And I want you to know that my colleagues and I at Creative Leadership Solutions are deeply committed to schools around the world. We can't wait to be back in the field and be supporting you face to face. But between now and then, we want you to count on us. Thanks, Tony, and thanks everybody for joining us today.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Have a wonderful rest of the week.